The two worst strategic mistakes to make are acting prematurely and letting an opportunity slip by. To avoid this, the warrior treats each situation as if it were unique and never resorts to formulae, recipes, or other people's opinions. Paulo Coelho, famous Brazilian writer. This is the Brazilian Constitution. Preamble. We, the representatives of the Brazilian people, convene the National Constituent Assembly to institute a democratic state destined to ensure the exercise of social and individual rights, liberty, security, well-being, development, equality, and justice as supreme values of a fraternal, pluralist, and unprejudiced society, founded on social harmony and committed in the domestic and international orders to the peaceful solution of disputes. Promulgate, under the protection of God, the following Constitution of the Federative Republic of Brazil. My friends, if you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain a little. Number one, it's free. Two, there's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer. Anchor will then distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many, many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you've ever been looking for to make a podcast in one place. Go ahead and download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Title 1. The Fundamental Principles. Article 1. The Federative Republic of Brazil, formed by the indissoluble union of states and counties, municipios, as well as the federal district, is a democratic state of law founded upon 1. Sovereignty. 2. Citizenship. 3. Human dignity. 4. Social values of work and free initiative. 5. Political pluralism. Sole paragraph. All power emanates from the people, who exercise it through elective representatives or directly according to this Constitution. Article 2. The branches of the Union are the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary, which are independent and harmonious with each other. The fundamental objective of the Federative Republic of Brazil are 1. To build a free, just, and unified society. 2. To guarantee national development. 3. To eradicate poverty and substandard living conditions and to reduce social and regional inequalities. 4. To promote the well-being of all without prejudice as to origin, race, sex, color, age, and any other form of discrimination. Article 4. The international relations of the Federative Republic of Brazil are governed by the following principles. 1. National independence. 2. Prevalence of human rights. 3. Self-determination of peoples. 4. Non-intervention. 5. Equality among states. 6. Defense of peace. 7. Peaceful solution of conflicts. 8. Repudiation of terrorism and race. 9. Cooperation among people for the progress of humanity. And 10. Concession of political asylum. Sole paragraph. The Federative Republic of Brazil shall seek the economic, political, social, and cultural integration of the people of Latin America, with a view toward forming a Latin American community of nations. When it comes to preparing for your financial future, there's no better time to start than today. My mission is to help create financial peace of mind and guide my clients on a path to a successful retirement. Click on the link below and schedule an appointment for us to sit down and chat. Title 2: Fundamental Rights and Guarantees. Chapter 1: Individual and Collective Rights and Duties. Everyone is equal before the law with no distinction whatsoever, guaranteeing to Brazilians and foreigners residing in the country the inviolability of the rights to life, liberty, equality, security, and property on the following terms. Men and women have equal rights and duties under the terms of this Constitution. No one shall be compelled to do or refrain from doing something except by force of law. No one shall be submitted to torture or to inhumane or degrading treatment. Manifestation of thought is free, but anonymity is forbidden. The right of reply is assured in proportion to the offense, as well as compensation for pecuniary or moral damages or damages to reputation. Freedom of conscience and belief is inviolable, assuring free exercise of religious belief and guaranteeing, as set forth in law, protection of places of worship and their rights. Providing religious assistance at civilian and military establishments for collective confinement is assured, as provided by law. No one shall be deprived of any rights because of religious belief or philosophical or political convictions, unless invoked in order to be exempted from a legal obligation imposed upon all by one refusing to perform an alternative service established by law. Expression of intellectual, artistic, scientific, and communication activity is free, independent of any censorship or license. Personal intimacy, private life, honor, and reputation are inviolable, guaranteeing the right to compensation for pecuniary or moral damages resulting from the violation thereof. The home is the individual's inviolable asylum, and no one may enter it without the dweller's consent, except in cases of flagrant delicto, disaster or rescue, or during the day with a court order. Secrecy of correspondence and of telegraphic data and telephonic communications is inviolable, except in the latter case by court order in the situations and manner established by law for purposes of criminal investigation or the fact-finding phase of a criminal prosecution. Exercise of any job, trade, or profession is free, observing the professional qualifications that the law establishes. Access to information is assured to everyone, protecting the confidentiality of sources when necessary for professional activity. Movements within the national territory is free in peacetime, and any person may, as provided by law, enter, remain, or leave with his or her assets. All persons may hold peaceful meetings without weapons in places open to the public without need for authorization, so long as they do not interfere with another meeting previously called for at the same place, subject only to prior notice for the proper authority. There is total freedom of association for lawful purposes, but any paramilitary association is prohibited. Creation of associations, and as set forth in law, of cooperatives requires no authorization, prohibiting state interference in their cooperations. Associations may be compulsorily dissolved or their activity suspended only by a judicial decision, which in the former case may be a final and unappealable decision. tránsito en jubilado. No one can be compelled to join an association or to remain in one. When expressly authorized, associations have standing to represent their members judicially and extrajudicially. The right of property is guaranteed. Property shall comply with its social function. The law shall establish procedures for expropriation for public necessity or use, or for social interest upon just and prior compensation in cash, with the exception of cases provided in this Constitution. In the event of imminent public danger, the proper authority may use private property, assuring the owner subsequent compensation in case of damage. Small rural property, as defined by law, whenever worked by a family, shall not be subject to attachment for payment of debts stemming from its productive activities, and the law shall provide for ways to finance its development. Authors own the exclusive right to use, publish, or reproduce their own works, and such rights may be transmitted to their heirs for a period fixed by law. The following are assured by law: protection of individual participation in collective works and reproduction of human voices and images, including in sports activities. The rights of creators, performers, and their respective syndicates and associations to monitor the economic utilization of works that they create or in which they participate. The law shall assure inventors of industrial inventions a temporary privilege for their use, as well as the protection of industrial creations, the ownership of trademarks, company names, and other distinctive signs, taking into account social interests and the technological and economic development of the country. The right of inheritance is guaranteed. Inheritance of foreigners' assets located in the country shall be governed by Brazilian law for the benefit of the Brazilian spouse or the children whenever the personal law of the deceased is not more favorable to them. The state shall provide for consumer protection in accordance with the law. All persons have the right to conceive from public agencies information in their private interest or of collective or general interest. Such information shall be furnished within the period established by law, under penalty of liability, except for information whose secrecy is essential to the security of society and of the national government. All persons are guaranteed, without the payment of fees, the right to petition public authorities in defense of rights or against illegality or abuse of power, obtaining certificates from government offices for defense of rights and clarification of situations of public personal interest. The law may not exclude from review by the judiciary any injury or threat to a right. No law may impair a vested right, a perfected juristic act, or rejudicate it. There shall be no exceptional court or tribunals. The institution of the jury is recognized with the organization given to it by law, assuring a. full defense, b. secret voting, c. sovereignty of verdicts, d. jurisdiction of judges, willful crimes against life. There are no crimes unless defined in prior law, nor are there any penalties unless previously imposed by law. The criminal shall not be retroactive except to benefit the defendant. The law shall punish any discrimination against attacking fundamental rights and liberties. The practice of racism is a non-bailable crime not subject to the statute of limitations and is punishable by imprisonment as provided by law. The law shall regard as crimes not subject to bail, clemency, or amnesty the practice of torture, illicit trafficking in narcotics and similar drugs, terrorism, and those crimes defined as heinous. Liable for these crimes are those giving the commands, those executing these commands, and those who, although able to avoid the crimes, fail to do so, actions of civilian or military armed groups against the constitutional order and the democratic state are non-bailable crimes for which the statute of limitation never runs out. No punishment shall extend beyond the person convicted, but liability for damages and a decree of loss of asset may, as provided by law, extend to successors and be enforced against them up to the limit of the value of the assets transferred. The law shall regulate individualization of punishment and shall adopt inter alia the following: deprivation or restriction of liberty, loss of property, fine, alternative social service, suspension or deprivation of rights. There shall be no penalties of death except in case of declared war in the terms of Article 84, of perpetual character, of forced labor, of banishment, or anything that are cruel. Sentences shall be served in separate establishments according to the nature of the offense and age and sex of the convict. Prisoners are assured respect for their physical and moral integrity. Female prisoners shall be assured conditions that allow them to remain with their children during the nursing period. No Brazilian shall be extradited except for a naturalized Brazilian for a common crime committed prior to naturalization or proven involvement in unlawful traffic in narcotics and similar drugs provided by law. No foreigner shall be extradited for a political or ideological offense. No one shall be tried or sentenced other than by a proper authority. No one shall be deprived of liberty or property without due process of law. Litigants in judicial or administrative proceedings and defendants in general are assured in an adversary system and a full defense, with the measures and recourses inherent therein. Evidence obtained through unlawful means is inadmissible in proceedings. No one shall be considered guilty until his criminal conviction has become final and non-appealable. A civilly identified person shall not be submitted to criminal identification except in cases provided by law. Private prosecution for crimes subject to public prosecution, crimes de algo pública, shall be permitted if a public prosecution is not brought within the period established by law. The law may restrict publicity of procedural acts only if required to defend privacy or the social interest. No one shall be arrested unless in flagrant delicto or by written and substantiated order of a competent judicial authority, except for a military offense or a specific military crime as defined by law. The arrest of any person in the place where he can be found shall be communicated immediately to the proper judge and to the arrested person's family, or to a person designated by him. One under arrest shall be informed of his rights, including the right to remain silent, and shall be assured assistance of his family and a lawyer. No one under arrest has the right to identification of those responsible for his arrest or his interrogation by police. Judicial authority shall direct immediate release of those illegally arrested. No one shall be taken to prison or held therein when the law permits provisional liberty, with or without bond. There shall be no civil imprisonment for debt, except for a person who inexcusably defaults on a support obligation, and for an unfaithful depository. Habeas corpus shall be guaranteed whenever a person suffers or is threatened with suffering violence or coercion in his freedom of movement through illegality of abuse of power. A writ of security shall be issued to protect the liquid and certain right not protected by habeas corpus or habeas data, when the party responsible for the illegality or abuse of power is a public authority or an agent of a legal entity performing a governmental duty. A collective writ of security may be brought by a political party represented in the National Congress, a union, professional organization, or association legally organized and operative for at least 1 year, to defend the interests of its members or associates. A mandate of injunction shall be issued whenever lack of regulatory provisions make exercise of constitutional rights and liberties and the prerogatives inherent in nationality, sovereignty, and citizenship unfeasible. Habeas data shall be granted to assure knowledge of a personal information about the petitioner contained in records of data banks of government agencies or entities of public character, to correct data whenever the petitioner prefers not to do so through confidential judicial or administrative procedures. Chapter 2: Social Rights. Education, health, nutrition, labor, housing, leisure, security, social security, protection of motherhood and childhood, and assistance to the destitute are social rights in accordance with this Constitution. The following are rights of urban and rural workers in addition to any others designed to improve their social condition. Employment protected against arbitrary dismissal or dismissal without cause as provided by complementary law that shall establish severance pay among other rights. Unemployment insurance in the events of involuntary unemployment. A guarantee fund for the length of service. A national uniform minimum wage fixed by law, capable of meeting a worker's basic living needs and those of his family, for housing, nourishment, education, health, leisure, clothing, hygiene, transportation, and social security, with periodic adjustments to maintain its purchasing power, prohibiting linkage to it as index for any purpose. A salary floor in proportion to the extent and complexity of the work. Irreducibility of salaries or wages except when provided for in collective agreement or accord. For those reviewing variable compensation, a guarantee that the salary or wage will never fall below the minimum wage. A 13th month salary based on full pay or the amount of pension. Higher remuneration for nighttime work than for daytime work. Wage protection as provided by law, with intentional retention constituting a crime. Participation in profits or results independent of remuneration, and exceptionally, participation in management of the company as defined by law. Family allowance for dependents of the low-income worker as provided by law. Normal working hours not to exceed 8 hours per day and 40 hours per week, permitting a trade-off of work hours and reduction in the workday through an accord or a collective bargaining agreement. A workday of 6 hours for work performed in continuous shifts unless otherwise established by collective bargaining. Paid weekly rest, preferably on Sundays. A pay scale for overtime at least 50% higher than that for normal work. An annual paid vacation at least 1/3 higher than the normal pay. Maternity leave without loss of job or wages for a period of 120 days. Paternity leave as provided by law. Protection of the job market for women through specific incentives as provided by law. Advance notice of dismissal proportional to length of service with a minimum of 30 days as provided by law. Reduction of risks inherent in the job by means of health, hygiene, and safety rules. Additional remuneration for strenuous, unhealthy, or dangerous work as provided by law. Retirement pension. Free assistance for children and dependents from birth to 5 years of age in daycare centers and preschools. Recognition of collective bargaining accords and agreements. Protection because of automation as provided by law. Occupational accident insurance paid for by the employer without excluding the employer's liability for indemnity in the event of malice or fault. A cause of action for amounts due from employment relationships with a statute of limitations of 5 years for urban and rural workers up to a limit of 2 years after termination of labor contracts. Prohibition of any difference in pay, in performance of duties, and in hiring criteria by reason of sex, age, color, or marital status. Prohibition of any discrimination with respect to pay and hiring criteria for handicapped workers. Prohibition of any distinction among manual, technical, and intellectual work or among the respective professionals. Prohibition of nighttime, dangerous, or unhealthy work for those under age 18 and or any work for those under the age of 16 except as an apprentice. Equal rights for workers with a permanent employment relationship and for occasional workers. Every financial decision we make needs to be made with an eye towards the future. I take the time to listen to what your goals and challenges are and work hard to help make those decisions easier. Let's start with a conversation to figure out your needs and find out if we can work together. Then we'll figure out the best way to enrich, strengthen, and build a brighter financial future for you and your family. Reach out to me, click on the link below, and schedule an appointment. Have a good one.